Hello and welcome to Future Squared. Stephen Hawking once said that intelligence is the ability to adapt to change, so let's adapt. My name is Steve Glaveski, and each week I'll bring you conversations with preeminent thought leaders from a variety of fields to help you think in a multidisciplinary way, keep goals in your professional and personal life, and better navigate what is fast becoming a brave, new world. Future Squared is brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation accelerator that works with organizations to unlock their people's latent potential to create more impact for humanity and lead more fulfilling lives. If you need help driving your organization's innovation strategy, visit collectivecampus.io. And without further ado,
come with me if you want to live.
Welcome back to Future Squared for a special bonus episode with Adam Ashton and Adam Jones. Adam and Adam met as two young blokes while attending Monash University, studying commerce and structural engineering respectively. Both were keen on making the most of their advantaged access to education as Australian citizens, ready to start their first job in the big city. They looked to books for the answer to some big questions, such as, how do I make the most of my life? And how do I get people to like me in the office? They found more than they bargained for. Since June 2016, they've committed to reading and reviewing a new book each week, hosting the What You Will Learn podcast that has seen them interview everyone from Scott Adams and Dan Pink to Robert Cialdini and Annie Duke. I enjoyed catching up with the guys on the 2nd of January as we dusted off the cognitive cobwebs of the holidays and settled in for an hour-long discussion on all things life-changing books, mindset, and philosophy. With that, strap yourselves in for my very first interview of 2019 with the hosts of What You Will Learn, Adam Jones and Adam Ashton. Welcome to the show, Adam and Adam.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us, Steve.
It's a pleasure to have you boys in the office. It is the 2nd of January, and I understand, well, I thought you guys would be recovering from a couple of big nights, but I understand you guys have given up whiskey, both of you?
I'm fully off the alcohol entirely.
Yeah, fully off the booze. Fully.
As of
yesterday, I'm 1 day.
2 days for me.
So is this just like, 90% of New Year's resolutions don't make the cut, right? So is this just going to be one of those, is this something I check back on February and be like, sorry, I didn't last?
No, I think this is the real deal. So this author, Alan Carr, he wrote the book Easy Way to Stop Smoking. And 5 years ago, I was a pack-a-day smoker. And what he does, he doesn't talk anything bad about the drug you're trying to get off or anything bad about smoking or alcohol. He'll just sell the idea of not taking that substance like so well you naturally want to just move into this other direction.
Yeah.
So 5 years ago, it was cigarettes, and I haven't had a cigarette since, and I quit completely easily. So if anyone out there is a smoker, read this book and your mind will be absolutely blown. And similar with alcohol. So you just read it, and I think this could be long term, man. It could be forever, but It's hard to say forever.
Wow.
Yeah, for me, I think we read 12 months ago The Easy Way to Stop Smoking for our podcast where we review a book each week and try to pull out the best stuff. And I didn't relate to the smoking per se because I didn't smoke. No one in my immediate family smoked. I thought, this is a pretty cool book. Obviously, it had a big impact for Adam Jones. But reading the alcohol one, we thought, okay, New Year's resolutions, we'll do alcohol. Maybe some people want to quit. I thought again, I'm not an alcoholic. I don't have an alcohol problem. I'll just read it for the podcast and maybe it'll help someone else. But 20 pages in, I started to realize, hang on, maybe there's something here and maybe I am relying on alcohol a little bit too much, and you got me and I'm off it.
It's funny how books can have such a dramatic impact on your lifestyle. I was mentioning earlier that I read Matt Walker's Why We Sleep, and that just demonstrated so clearly the value of getting 8 hours of sleep as opposed to the 6 hours that I was getting for almost a decade. And I would be, I would consider that a badge of honor of sorts. I'd say, I crush it 6 hours a night. That's all I need. Wake up, go to the gym. But those last 2 hours of sleep a night are so key because that's when you have your deep REM sleep, and that's fundamental for mood regulation and creativity. So huge. But I guess on that though, it's easy to just look at the facts that are presented. What about the flip side? For example, social lubricant, and having a good night with friends and associates and then feeling better the next day. which alcohol does do for us. And some of my greatest memories were alcohol fueled. So
okay, well, I think you need to read the full book. We'll try and smack a few of these down. I guess the first one, that social lubricant. And you think, if I have one or two drinks and I really open up, I get that courage or I get that confidence to go out there and talk. And yeah, maybe the first time you start thinking like that, but then when you don't have a drink and you go to a social function, then you think, oh, I've got no confidence, I can't talk to anyone. So it gradually saps your confidence rather than you think it gives you confidence, but by then relying on the drug to give you the confidence, it saps your actual confidence. So then when you don't drink one time, you think you're not as confident.
Yeah, it's absolutely a slippery slope when, I'm not saying this is for you, but a lot of people out there, including myself, say if you go to a party and a lot of people drink, especially at the start, to go and speak to the opposite sex, which it definitely helps to go up to them and, speak with a little bit more courage. But in reality, once you start relying on alcohol to do these kind of things for you, it's a really slippery slope, because once you are without the alcohol, then you're kind of left naked and stranded. So it's
just keep drinking the alcohol.
Exactly.
I don't think there's an alcohol shortage right now.
Well, absolutely. But it's a really exciting journey. The first time you stop drinking and you go out for a night where everyone else is pissed off their face or something like that, and you go if you're single, speak into the opposite sex again for the first, it's like a whole new learning curve. If you've always relied on, or if you've always drank in these situations and all of a sudden you're without it, it's like you're learning the skill all over again of, just conversing with people. And it's something we really, I think, lose because of alcohol.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of conversing with people, you boys host the What You Will Learn podcast, and we kind of went straight into talking about books, but perhaps we should give our audience a bit of backstory. As I said, What You Will Learn podcast is all about books, but I'd love to understand a little bit more about how you guys actually met and came to work together. Well, you met at university, right? So you were studying engineering, Adam Jones.
Absolutely.
And you were studying commerce, Adam Ashton, right? Yeah. Fantastic. But studying such disparate fields, how did you come to meet each other and work together?
We're actually working in a pub together. Obviously a bit of a casual job on the side.
Yep. Bringing it back to the alcohol.
We saw a lot of drunks out there that were relying on alcohol too much. But it was sort of, we sort of just crossed paths, and Adam Jones went overseas, so my first shift was his last shift. When he came back, I got the boot, so his first shift back was my last shift. But then we just crossed paths at uni when we were both reading a book, and we both sort of started on this journey of wanting to read more books and learn and expose ourselves to other different ideas and different experiences. And then we both finished uni at the same time and started jobs in the city at the same time, whilst we were in very different fields. But we met up once a week and we were talking about the books we read, and then we thought, okay, maybe we should sync up. We'll read the same book, so at least then we can talk about the same thing. And then we thought, okay, well, we're doing this. Maybe we should do a podcast about this, because we both enjoyed podcasts, we both enjoyed reading, and we thought maybe we'll learn a new skill. And as a very worst case scenario, we'll learn how to make a podcast. We'll retain more from the books because we've got to talk about it and teach it. We'll try and maybe improve our speaking.
Yep. So basically capping the downside.
Yeah, exactly. And then maybe someone will listen.
Yeah.
But at worst case, if no one listens, we've got all these other benefits tied into it.
Yeah, that's right. As you said, capping the downside. If no one out there listens, then it really doesn't matter, because there's different layers of retention in first reading the book, but then actually going back through it the second time and writing down all your notes, and then talking about what you're about to say on the episodes. That's a third layer of retention. And then the fourth is actually just doing the actual episode, and then we listen to it back. So there's by the time you hear the same content 5 or 6 times in the one hit, you really remember a lot of the stuff and get it.
Yeah. So that was something that I wanted to deep dive on with you guys around retention, because you read a lot of books. From what I understand, a book a week on average. Is that? Yep. So 52 book reviews / interviews a year. And you're now over 100 episodes in.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So when you're reading so much, it can become difficult to really retain a lot of it, particularly when you haven't really sat on a topic for that long and you've just moved on to the next book. But I imagine going through that process of taking the notes, preparing for an interview, interviewing the person, discussing it amongst yourselves really helps to solidify and create connections between the content you've just consumed.
I think it's definitely a more active approach. So in the past, when I had just started reading and I was reading on the side, I could definitely feel the benefits, and I knew, man, this is a really cool idea. But with that retention, it wasn't quite as strong, because yes, I I was reading the book, but it was almost passive. And you know, sometimes you read a book and you're 3 pages in, and then you forget that you were reading entirely, and I actually didn't read any of it. But it's a more active approach of, you know, we're taking notes as we go, and then we're going back through the best stuff to make our own notes of that. And so it's sort of like that repetition of doing the same thing over and over, but also the active approach rather than the passive approach to reading.
Yeah, I remember the first books I read, just finishing the whole book, and then someone asked me, what's that book about? And I wouldn't even have an answer for it.
Yeah, man, I went through the same thing. Like, I read hundreds of books before I started taking a more active approach. And I could probably pull out 1 or 2 facts or one-liners from those books, and that's it. It wasn't until I actually started highlighting, turning those highlights into a Google Doc, maybe turning that Google Doc into a blog post, teaching my team about what I've learned, talking about these concepts on a podcast episode, and then you retain so much more of it. And also getting those last 2 hours sleep a night as well.
Oh, yeah.
They're all very important, right? But on the whole notion of what to read, because when you guys started reading these books, you know, you said you met each other and you just, for whatever reason, synchronized and started reading the same books, but you guys asked big questions. It wasn't about, I want to learn about, you know, management, accounting. It was more like big life questions, like how do I make the most of my life, rather than just learn a technical skill. So, I mean, what do you think that came from? Because I feel like a lot of people go through life on autopilot and never really ask those big questions.
Honestly, I think at the very start, for me, it was all about business, and I wasn't enjoying my corporate job, and I wanted to, you know, quit my job, follow my passion, start a business. So I was reading all these business type of books, like, you know, the 4 Hour Work Week, Millionaire Fastlane, Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Yep.
All of those types of books are all confirming that idea of, you know, quit your job and start your business. And so that was probably, I think, at the very start of the podcast, we probably wanted to just do business books. But the more we read, the more, I reckon you've got a good quote here, like, the more you know that you don't know.
Yep.
So just
Socrates. Yep.
That was from a good book I read recently called Employee to Entrepreneur.
Great book.
And so I think it was just like the more...
Very charming author, I understand.
Oh, yeah. Legend.
So then, like, we just got this, you know, it planted some seeds of actually, yeah, this business stuff is good, but maybe there's more out there. So we very quickly went from a business podcast to very, you know, expanding, you know, talking about limits to growth, talking about the planet, talking about the environment, talking about science, and then talking about philosophy and religion. And so we very quickly branched out into much more important questions than just quit your job and follow your passion.
Yeah, because at the very start, you can really just fall into the trap of confirmation bias and just read the things you're already interested in and the things you already know about.
Yeah. And
there probably is more value in reading from an author who has a completely different viewpoint to you. Because if you think about everyone you hang out with in your life, it's probably people quite similar to you with similar attitudes.
Yep.
Your Facebook feeds probably tuned to what you already believe, and so same with your YouTube channels and so forth. So as soon as you start branching out a bit more, you'll probably find that there's a lot of dichotomies when it comes to books. Like, some books will present one viewpoint, and early days for me would be something like How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is all about listening and being a good person and being ultra nice. But then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you read a book like Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene, who you've been lucky enough to interview recently. And what he'll talk about is confronting your dark side and allowing this dark part of yourself to really come out and be very assertive. So these are real two opposite ends of the spectrum, but they're both highly valuable, but you'll only find out both bits of information to be able to incorporate it into you by going really wide with books.
Yeah. So is that something you guys are really intentional about? Because one of my biggest things of around 2018 was embracing the philosophy of strong opinions weakly held, because for so long I would read something in a book or listen to it on a podcast and take it as gospel and be like, yeah, that makes sense, and then I'd go on and preach it to other people. But I realized how short-sighted that actually was, because there may be a vested interest there may be confirmation bias. If you took the information, the facts, the statistics that they used to come to that conclusion and looked at them from a different angle, you'd come to a different conclusion. Is the sample size big enough? Like, there's so many different variables that can influence whether or not that fact is true or not, right? Or that piece of information is true or not. So is that something you intentionally do now when you read something, you seek out opposing views? And I think this is a really important point, because now we're seeing so much divisiveness, particularly in the political realm, between left and write. And you've got these online echo chambers where, like you said, you're on Facebook, all you see is media that confirms your pre-existing beliefs rather than something that challenges it. So how do you guys go about actively doing that, if you do?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely huge. So confirmation bias is one, and you might also just seek out the things that you like to hear that are really nice, that fit your current viewpoint. And one of the most popular ones, which we all love to hear about, is, follow your passion, which is there's a massive case for that, because passion can be fuel for you to really tackle bigger and bigger goals. But at the same time, you might read in another book, So Good They Can't Ignore You, that passion can also be dangerous, because it might lead you to quit your job, which you kind of don't like, but you're really gaining valuable skills from a job you're not passionate about. And then you go out, follow your passion, and you might end up in a job like, I don't know, like a yoga teacher. Not necessarily that that's a bad thing, but there might be a job out there where there really isn't necessarily a market for it as well.
Yeah, he talks about how if Steve Jobs talked about, follow your passion, or, if you find something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. But then Cal Newport talks about how if he actually did just follow his passion, he'd probably just be doing a lot of drugs and being a hippie.
LSD in India.
So eating a lot of apples as well. Yeah. From what I understand.
So I think it is important to, I don't know if we probably don't do it enough. We probably don't actively go outside our comfort zone enough. We probably do need to read a little bit more broadly, but I think there's so many books out there, and we'll get to them eventually for sure. Yeah,
and there are so many books out there. So have you guys started to adopt, or maybe you've already adopted, like speed reading techniques and things of that persuasion?
No, not for me. It's more definitely been reading a lot quicker, just out of reading such a huge volume. But for me, it's just siphoning off time and trying to set aside an hour and a half to 2 hours a day to read. Because I think for most people, and I always pull this fact completely out of my ass, but it sounds about right. That is like, most people watch TV maybe 16 hours a week or something. And if you siphon off maybe half of that and only 8 hours a week, you're probably starting to look at a book a week. It's not a big time investment.
A lot of dark spaces whereby you can read, like, for example, I catch a train into work, 15, 20 minutes in, 20 minutes out. That's 40 minutes a day, maybe 20 minutes, half an hour before bed. That's a good hour a day that you can read, which adds up very quickly, particularly if you're a reasonably fast reader. It's just about being intentional with it. And I think once you get to that point where you derive a hell of a lot of value from books, it makes it much easier to justify investing that time. But if you haven't even gone down that journey, it's easy to just say, what am I going to read a book for? I'm just going to turn on Netflix and watch Chris Rock wax enthusiastic about some current affair.
That's right.
Definitely.
It's like like I understand you've got some great habits that you do every day. At first, it takes willpower to install the habits for a certain amount of time, but after a while, it actually becomes really, really enjoyable and very easy to just read a couple of hours a day.
So, I mean, on habits, because it sounds like you've both taken a lot of learnings out of the books you've read in a way that have fundamentally influenced your life. On habit and habit formation, there's a lot of books out there. Charles Duhigg's The Power of Habit. Most recently, James Clear's Atomic Habits. Have there been any books that have been influential for you in that space?
I haven't read either of those, so I'll have to add those.
Well, there you go.
They're sitting on the bookshelf. One I liked was Mini Habits, which is...
I haven't come across that.
It's probably not as popular as the two that you mentioned, but it's just the idea of doing something extremely, extremely small that it's almost impossible to fail. So he talks about the idea of, for him, it was the golden push-up was just to do one push-up a day. And that was his habit. He committed to every day do one push-up. So for you, it might be read one paragraph or one page if you want to try to read more books. Like something...
Floss one tooth, I've heard that one.
Absolutely. So something ridiculously small, it's almost impossible to fail. And then if you commit to that and do it every single day and don't break the chain, you might realize that, hang on, I'm already on the ground. I've already done one push-up. I may as well do two. Or maybe you've already opened the book, you've read your one page that you have to do for the day. Maybe that one page becomes 3 or 4. So just that idea of starting extremely small, commit to not breaking the chain, and maybe you can add to that as you go.
It's a nice little trick because that takes hardly any willpower to just go, I'll just do one push-up. If you really let yourself to just only do one push-up and not more, it's It's good because most of the time, though, as you said, you'll do one, oh, I'm already doing it, and you just keep on going and so forth. So if the goal is just one, it's something that it's too hard to fail.
Yeah, if you say, oh, I'm going to read for an hour a day, it's very easy to justify not reading, and you'll very quickly get out of that. Why most New Year's resolutions don't last.
Well, it's like John Maxwell, the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. He's got the law of momentum, which I think applies in any domain. And Tim Ferriss also says, 200 crappy words a day. If you're writing a book or an article or something to that effect, don't sit down and look at that blank page thinking, oh, well, I've got to write 2,000 words and become overwhelmed by it. Just say, hey, I'm just going to write 200 crappy words, not just 200 words. It's just going to be crap. Yeah. But once you start, it's much easier to keep writing, and you might write 1,000 words and then you've got something to work with. You can go back, you can revisit it, and you can improve it and tweak it and make it better. But one of the biggest reasons we don't achieve is because we don't start, and we become overwhelmed by the big picture rather than just breaking it down into smaller chunks.
Yeah. And habits are great. If The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
Yeah, resistance.
Exactly, the resistance. It's the difference between where you're now and basically what your potential is. And a lot of the time it is just this resistance, like to actually get started. And he talks about the best way to defeat the resistance is by turning pro. And that's by rocking up every day, whether it's 9 a.m., whether it's, writing the 200 words or 1,000 words or whatever. It's just doing it every day professionally. And that's the way to defeat the resistance.
Yeah.
And habits are the best way of turning pro. Once you do it habitually, you're defeating the resistance every single day.
Yeah. I think the old adage is become comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? And leaning into discomfort, because that's what's going to differentiate you from the majority who don't like feeling uncomfortable. And I guess a lot of that may come from the fact that over the last 200 years, we've made so much progress as a society, as economies, whereby 200 years ago, you didn't really have clean running water, electricity, healthcare, whereas now you walk down to the local Coles, 500 meters around the corner, you've got blueberries from Chile, you've got kangaroo from some other Australian state. Like, there's food from all over the world. We're not having to hunt and gather our food, and we have it so easy that people just expect everything to be easy, and that at the smallest hint of discomfort or adversity, we just become really defensive and shy away from it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. I think it is important to, we live where we live, our neighbours are probably the same sorts of people as us. When we went to school, they were most of the same sorts of people as us. Where we work, they're probably the same sorts of people as us. So it is very easy to get comfortable and just do the same thing that everybody else is doing. And so that's why I sort of found that the books are a great way to get a completely different idea and, inject something different into your life, and a different dot that you can maybe collect, like your book said as well.
Yeah. Appreciate the callback to the book. No, I've been learning how to surf over the break. It's something I've had a couple of lessons over in Bali about a year ago. I quite enjoyed it, and then got a board recently. And talk about leaning into discomfort. Do you guys surf at all? Or?
I do.
You do?
I learned pretty late as well. I learned when I was about 18. It's the best thing I've ever learned.
Well, I'm 35, so I'm learning really late. But you talk about leaning into discomfort when you're paddling out and you've got this wave coming in, crashing head on, and you just get knocked off your board. And it's so easy at that point to say, stuff this. But you're like, no, that's awesome. Now I've got an opportunity to overcome that adversity and get back on and keep going and keep going and keep going until eventually you manage to paddle out far enough, turn around and catch a wave. And it's the best feeling in the world.
It's amazing. It's like we were saying earlier, if you look at the downside of surfing, all you're doing out there is having a great workout, exercise in salt water, which is amazing, and anything above that's a bonus.
Exactly.
But eventually you actually really get that bonus, and when you start getting waves, all of a sudden you can travel all around the world and have an incredible hobby you can take everywhere. It's amazing.
Definitely, couldn't agree more on that. And speaking of your podcast, you've had a star-studded array of guests. I'm envious. I mean, I've had some great guests, but I've not had the likes of Robert Cialdini, Dan Ariely, Predictably Irrational. Love that book. Scott Adams from Dilbert, Michael Shermer, Dan Heath, Dan Pink. I mean, Seth Godin as well. That's huge. I know he's one of your big idols. On those guests, I mean, have there been any that really stand out for you? Because you interviewed over 100 people now, right?
Yeah, for me, Seth Godin was definitely the big one. And
why is that?
For me, I got on pretty late actually to the Seth Godin train, but I love his books. Like most of his books, like say the Dip, it's like 80 pages. It's one pretty simple idea. It's easy to read, but it really changes the whole way you look at things. Like Tribes, it's another short book. They're short, simple, sweet books. I love his ideas. I love the way he thinks. I heard him on the Tim Ferriss podcast, and that's when I got on and started reading his books. And then I've read a whole bunch of his books. Loved his ideas, love the way he thinks, love the way he talks, and to be able to interview him was just phenomenal. Just personally, I thought it was great, and then I think the episode as well was pretty good.
Yeah.
What about you? Dr. Carl. You know Dr. Carl. Yeah. It's just really refreshing to see how he is on the TV and in podcasts. It's exactly who he is in real life. So I remember just hanging out with him before the podcast, like we have today, and. Yeah, he's such a warm person, but at the same time, he's the type who will challenge you. He ripped me to parts a few times off air as well, which is great to see. But yeah, on air.
Speaking of discomfort.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, discomfort's huge, man. I was about to say before, like when you brought that up, I was watching. I've been watching Vikings recently, which is on Netflix.
I love Vikings. I didn't watch much TV, but every once a year, once every 2 years, I geek out on a particular series, and man, Vikings. Oh,
dude, love it. If you think about what it used to be like, you just watch that. I mean, 500 years ago, people were just going to war with swords, getting your intestines pulled out and so forth. And today we just get to, we got it so easy, and we do forget that all the time. And you got to actively go out there and try and get uncomfortable. I mean, I know you've done stand-up comedy. It's something we've
tried.
We did it once. Yeah.
We did it once. We sucked, but it was completely uncomfortable.
Yeah. But even there, I read a couple of books on stand-up, and by the time I got on stage, I already had a reasonable grasp of the comedic sort of template. And so I was able to get a couple of laughs, and that was enough to motivate me to come back a second time, and then a third time, and then a fourth time. Whereas I think so many people that I saw on the scene, like they don't do any of that. They just turn up, and fair enough, like there is a hell of a lot to be said about turning up and just turning up night after night after night and just learning as you go. That's probably more important, but you can definitely accelerate that learning curve and stand on the shoulders of giants by reading a few books by the likes of, say, Steve Martin and people who have been doing this for decades. But so many people just don't pick up that book, and we see this in entrepreneurship as well. I've worked with heaps of entrepreneurs, and I'll ask them, have you read The Lean Startup? Have you read Traction by Gabriel Weinberg on marketing? No. And it's like, well,
it's hard to describe how much you get, especially a book like Lean Startup. It's people starting out and they're launching a rocket ship. It's that one book, and again, it's like 10 hours, $30, and it might. It's hard to measure how much they could save just from learning those simple ideas.
It's all right there. It's just waiting for you. Like it's someone's life work, like say Robert Cialdini, his whole life's work of years and years and decades of research and practice combined into one book, 300 pages, $30, 10 hours of reading, phenomenal. Or Dan Ariely, Predictably Irrational. That was probably my second favorite interview when we were able to do it in person as well. We emailed him, and he said, yeah, let's do it. Actually, I'm going to be in Sydney soon. So we went up to Sydney, went to his hotel room, had some wine. He talked about
all above board. We talked
about hedonic adaptation, the idea that once you start to get something, you're on this treadmill that it ratchets up and ratchets up. So maybe you're in uni and you think a treat is once a month you buy Macca's, and then you start to get a full-time income, and then maybe it's once a week you get Uber Eats, and it quickly ratchets up. And he talked about how maybe you get a taste for wine, you get more and more expensive wine, and it turns out the wine that we brought in wasn't that great. And then we went to the ballet with him afterwards, and so that was like an interview that we really enjoyed. And we loaded up the bank account. We thought we'd take him for dinner to some fancy restaurant, but just when we were walking in ballet, he's like, oh, what's this over here? Let's just go grab a kebab.
Oh, really?
Got the $10 kebab, which was even better.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. So on what you mentioned earlier, so going back to talking about 4-Hour Workweek and all these business books that you picked up when you were starting to explore getting into business, but then you realize that there's a whole wealth of books out there on mindset, philosophy, religion, neuroscience, and so on that are as, if not more, valuable. And I've definitely found that myself. Like, yeah, I've read a lot of business books, but I'd say the books on philosophy, for like whether it's Stoic philosophy, whether it's books on mindset, such as Carol Dweck's Mindset, that and Stephen Pressfield's The Art of War. The Art of War, The War of Art. War of Art. That's Sun Tzu. Yeah. Anyway, that to me has been way more transformational as a person, as an entrepreneur, than a business book. In what way have those books helped you get to where you are today and change your thinking?
I was completely surprised when I almost like accidentally read one of these books once. Like, you know,
how do you accidentally read a book? Just like opens up and
stumbled on it.
I thought it was a business book, and it turns out there was a lot more to it. But yeah, like you know, we get recommendations from other books or from podcasts. People recommend books, and so I thought I'd read one of these books, and like the ideas around behavioral economics and like influence and things like that completely was something I'd never thought about, but are probably now my favorite types of books.
Yep.
I think like on a personal level, just the ideas of rather than, you know, as we said, the basic stuff, quit your job and start a business. It was more the mindset and the thinking of approaching it as more of a long-term thing. I was definitely in a rush early on. I wanted to have a lot of success right now and do everything quick and be, you know, millionaire by 25 and all this sort of stuff. But it was thinking about these things that realized that maybe that's not the best approach, and maybe a long-term collect a few more dots is probably a better approach. So that really opened my eyes to a whole different world of learning as well.
We recently reviewed Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday, which I'm sure you've read. And again, it's hard to really describe. If someone, say you got two people, one person doesn't see the obstacle is the way and is really scared of challenging things and they hide from it their whole life. Compare that to someone who has the mindset that every single obstacle that comes along their journey onto whatever goals they might have is part of the journey, and it's not even a bad thing, but there are opportunities in it to actually grow. So one person's scared of it, the other person's going out there hunting obstacles. And if you track those two people over 50 years, you know, it leads to completely different destinations. And you also mentioned Mindset by Carol Dweck, like similar thing. If someone's got the fixed mindset who believes every quality or every skill out there is fixed, and it doesn't matter how much you work at it, it's fixed, there's no point in even trying, compared to someone with a growth mindset who believes that everything out there is learnable, and if, say, public speaking or anything like that, I suck now, but it is possible I can get there and learn this skill with some hard work. I mean, both attitudes and mindsets at the very obvious level, it just like leads to completely different
like
paths.
Compound interest in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you start off with a growth mindset instead of a fixed one. So on that notion of then, you know, you accidentally stumbled upon non-business books that were outside that domain and you found, wow, this is really valuable. Do you now... Because looking at the books that you guys have read and the people you've interviewed, like there's a hell of a lot of overlap there. And I know a lot of people I speak to who are in this space of entrepreneurship, podcasting, I'd say there's always like 80-90% overlap between the books that we read. So do you then, how do you go about reading something that no one's read and maybe creating a little bit of space for serendipity and just reading something from a fundamentally different domain, a book that has a crappy title and a cover that turns you off, but for whatever reason, you just make the space to read it because who knows?
Yeah, I've recently purchased Mating in Captivity, which is something we've never come even close to.
Yeah.
And it's all about eroticism in relationships.
Sounds wild.
And
wild.
It has.
Definitely.
Luckily, my girlfriend's started reading it.
Yeah.
And I've noticed big changes. We don't need to go into that. But I'm looking forward to reading
like
it.
A book everybody should buy their spouse.
Yeah.
Or their
100%,
girlfriend.
man. It's like probably the default out there. Everyone's a 1 out of 10 in relationships. Understanding how to inject eroticism into relationships and all that. You know, it's similar to what you're saying. It's that left of field that no one else has really, most people really haven't delved into. It's hard to know what's positive serendipity you might bring into your life from that. And you can see the patterns in some areas seemingly unrelated into other areas as well.
Yeah, I think that positive serendipity is definitely important. Like a book we recently read, The Black Swan, he talks about that.
Nassim Taleb?
Yeah, before they discovered Australia, they thought all swans were white. And then when they discovered Australia, they saw this, it was a swan, but it was black. And they thought, hang on, well, now their whole idea that they'd had, the whole world is this one way, just this one black swan completely shattered that opinion. So if you're reading a lot of the same books and there is a lot of overlap, you might build up this idea that, you understand the world, you understand exactly what's happening, but then one idea from one book that's a little bit left of center can completely shatter that whole idea.
Yeah.
As you say, that positive serendipity can completely take over.
Yeah.
So I think it comes back to that idea of not just reading, the 2 or 3 books and thinking that you know everything. It's the idea of constantly reading, constantly learning, exposing yourself to new things.
Yeah.
And then you join the dots, like you were just saying how Black Swan, which is all about trying to find positive serendipity and understanding that the whole world is so uncertain beyond our belief because we just narrate things into some kind of story when in reality there's so much uncertainty out there. I mean, that's one dot using the analogy from your book, Steve. And then another dot you might join with that is something like the lean startup. And you might think, all right, if the world's so uncertain out there, how can I maximize positive serendipity with all this uncertainty out there? And that might be taking minimum bets, building a whole bunch of minimal viable products to test assumptions out there. And all of a sudden you're throwing a whole bunch of shit against the wall and a little bit of that might stick. And then all of a sudden you got something and then you can double down on it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more on that. And just on the whole Black Swan philosophy, I mean, that ties in well with what we discussed earlier around strong opinions weakly held. And I was listening to a podcast with Firas Zahabi, George St. Pierre's trainer, the UFC fighter. He basically has I think he's got a doctorate in philosophy, and he chokes people out on the mat as a day job. But he on that whole notion of Black Swan philosophy or the Black Swan theory, he was saying how gravity may not be real. And on this podcast saying, well, it's real based on the evidence that we've collected and in the environment that we find ourselves in. But what's it going to take to, maybe there's more evidence that we haven't collected. And the host on this podcast, I think it was Joe Rogan potentially. He's like, are you sure about that? It's like, maybe he's taking this Black Swan theory a little bit too far. But I think it's important to note that because we've only, as a modern society that's been, since the printing press came along, it's actually not been that long that we've had recorded history, and there's only so much, so many data points we have collected and processed and made sense of, and there's so much we don't understand. So always being open to the Black Swan, I think is key. Yeah,
if you probably there's been, countless amounts of black swans in the past, and in each case, like say in Newton's times after Newton's laws came about and it's a way of modelling the world, everyone was certain that this is the level of science. There's nothing beyond that. All of a sudden Einstein comes along, that's another level, and then we think there's no way there's more to it than this. And this has probably happened at least 10 times in history, and at each level every single person was certain that their paradigm was the right one and the previous generations have been stupid. But in reality, you're right. Like we could be, or the person you talk about on Rogan's podcast, I mean, we could have a massive black swan that just upheaves gravity, quantum physics and so forth, because there's so much shit we really don't know much.
Oh yeah, and that's been one of the biggest things for me hosting a podcast. Now 300 plus episodes in, like you'd speak with someone who is, say, a preeminent economist, and then you'd speak to another preeminent economist, and they'd totally contradict each other, and you start to question, well, you're an expert, you're a quote unquote expert, saying totally different things, so who am I going to believe? And so that's when you really start to appreciate the value of just collecting a lot of dots and coming up with your own opinion, but not holding it too strongly, and not vehemently opposing anyone who doesn't agree.
Yeah, that's right. There's some really smart people. There's this idea of motivated reasoning. Someone really intellectual and very smart, they're very good at rationalizing ideas that might be false. So rather than being open-minded and taking in new things, they get better and better at explaining that something's wrong. So you might have a whole bunch of experts with differently held opinions, but are all hyper-intelligent at explaining these opinions. And, when you don't know as much in that field, it's really hard to know who to listen to.
Yeah. And I know you interviewed Annie Duke, as did we, about decisions and about, a lot of these biases that we come to think, we've talked a fair bit about confirmation bias, that once you get one idea in your head and that's your belief, everything you see seems to fit that idea and confirms that idea because that's what you're looking for. I think it is important to always have an open mind and realize that, okay, this is your belief right now, but there could be something out there that could completely change your mind altogether. So I think it's not being so strong in your position that you want to defend your own position. You want to be right so badly that you ignore the idea that actually maybe you could be wrong.
Yep. Love it. Just to go a little bit further on the positive serendipity and reading books you normally wouldn't read, does fiction play a part in your book repertoire?
Not yet for me. I reckon maybe eventually. Actually, I'll say my favourite fiction is Dr. Seuss.
Green Eggs and Ham? Classic.
Green Eggs and Ham, yeah, is pretty solid, but like other places you'll go, that's next level, and the Lorax is next level. So I reckon that's as much fiction as I've injected so far. Yeah. I think maybe one day.
Yeah. One day, I think. I think we're just stuck on the non-fiction. Astro was on the plane, and then he calls fiction not real books.
I think it's a different type of book. I think it's like if you're reading fiction more for entertainment, we're sort of still in the non-fiction learning for
it's
learning.
Interesting. I mean, I used to think the same thing, and now one of my I try to create positive serendipity in my life when it comes to books by each year. Like part of my goals is to read 3 classic fiction books. So over the last couple of years, I've read Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged.
That's a big book.
1,168 pages. It was intense. It took about a month, but it was really entertaining. But there was a hell of a lot of life and business lessons in there as well, and philosophical lessons. Like she pretty much coined the whole objectivism philosophy, which is more about ability and taking ownership and not making excuses. And I'm sure Jocko Willink would be a fan of that. But also Homer's The Odyssey and the Iliad, and Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. Like these are all fiction books, but you can take out a lot of life lessons. Like The Alchemist is all about sometimes you need to go on the journey in order to discover that the treasure is at your feet the entire time. And that's a lot like entrepreneurship. Like you won't have the answers from day one. Entrepreneurship, you won't have the answers from day one. You need to go on that journey. You won't have the perfect idea, but just by going out there, applying, say, the lean startup, testing your idea, learning, iterating, you eventually get the learnings you need to see what other people don't see. And that's effectively what genius is, right? The ability to see by collecting a lot of dots and going on that journey.
Absolutely. I think, most of the top people in the world are on your side of, getting a lot out of fiction. So it's something we should be looking at, because bringing in back to the Black Swan, it talks about the narrative fallacy and the idea that we carry stories much easier. It's like a Trojan horse where a story will come in, but embedded in the story is a whole bunch of facts that are easier to bring along through a narrative of some sorts. And as you were saying, like fiction is like a Trojan horse where it's easy to remember. And along with this fictional story, there's a lot of, embedded little facts and learnings that come with it.
Yeah, well, I know a lot of the people we've interviewed, Seth Godin, Kevin Kelly, who was on your show as well, Dr. Carl, they all talk, obviously very successful people, and they all talk extremely highly of science fiction in particular in terms of, I know Seth Godin said that science fiction completely changes ideas around business and around the future and around what's possible. And so he loves science fiction, which is something that I previously thought was just purely, entertainment purposes. And I know that Tim Ferriss talked a lot about how for 10 years he just read non-fiction books, and then he started to inject a little bit of fiction into there, and thinks that's pretty important. So I'd say we'll get there.
New year, maybe 3. What do you reckon, man? 3?
Nah, 1. We'll do 1.
We'll start with 1. Start baby steps.
Maybe you can throw out the no alcohol resolution and just read some fiction books. be easier to stick
Much
to.
easier.
So, I mean, I'm reading a lot of books, and I agree. I mean, I read a ton of books, probably not as many as you guys do. I mean, I read about a book a fortnight, maybe an audio book a month, and then I listen to a podcast episode a day. So there's a lot of content coming in. But to quote Seneca, one of my favorite philosophers, the primary indication to my thinking of a well-ordered mind is a man's ability to remain in one place and linger in his own company. Be careful, however, lest this reading of many authors and books of every sort may tend to make you discursive and unsteady. Ooh. So his whole thing was you should focus on a limited, actually I've got it here. You must linger among a limited number of master thinkers and digest their works if you would derive ideas which shall win firm hold in your mind. Everywhere means nowhere.
That's it. That's a great question. In our the way we do our podcast, we'll call that a red zone question, which we always try and inject in, and that's just a bit of the skeptical kind of question. So it's really good like that. Yeah, that's 100% true. I think there's some massive downsides to taking in so much information. It can leave you a little bit disillusioned at times because you'll be taking in so many different viewpoints that are counterproductive, and perhaps having some time to let them simmer and settle down and, you know, come up and put through your own filters and have your own spin on it. Yeah, I'd say you definitely need a bit of time for that. So there is a big downside to reading so much.
Yeah, I think on one hand, if you're doing marketing, you're going to be really good at marketing, go read 100 marketing books, and then you could get really good at marketing, is one way to approach it. And that probably is in line with the quote there of, you know, pick your field, stick to it, stick to the masters. On the other hand, we've been talking a lot about positive serendipity. We've been talking a lot about injecting different ideas in. It's probably my own confirmation bias that I want to reject that quote and just go for something else. But I'm currently reading Originals by Adam Grant. And that talks a lot about that, you know, say Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos are really good at business, are really good investors, but they completely made some awful decisions on one specific area. But he was saying that the idea is to get a whole bunch of different ideas in there, and then the original thinkers are the ones that can synthesize it the best. Like he talks about scientists in that there's a whole bunch of scientists that are really good, and then when you look at the Nobel Prize winning scientists, they're twice as likely to be really good at music. They're 7 times as likely to write poetry. And so they've got all these other things that one idea, like Seneca's idea might be just go full science, and you get really good at science. But this study of Nobel Prize winners was saying that by doing a bit of music and doing a bit of art and doing a bit of poetry and doing some of these different things actually makes you a better scientist, almost counterintuitively.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. I mean, creativity and innovation is really the intersection of a lot of disparate fields and thinking. I'm not sure if Seneca basically said just focus on one discipline, but focus on key, like, master thinkers. So it could be a number of different disciplines, but just the best of breed. And I find as well, you know, I get sometimes quite disillusioned when I have read so many books and then they'll just contradict the hell out of each other. And rather than that sharpening your sword and you coming up with a more, you know, refined opinion, it just leaves you thinking, well, what's the answer? Which is challenging. But on that as well, and just to take this red zone question and maybe make it, well, maybe not as red, maybe a little bit orange now. Escapism with books. You know, that's something that I often turn to books when maybe I just want to get away from the world. But to what end, right? Like it can... anything that gives us a sense of pleasure, dopamine here, like the accomplishment that comes with reading a book, we can become addicted to it. And one can easily become addicted to reading a lot of books because it's easy, it's comfortable, going back to the comfort thing, at the detriment of actually applying what we're reading and creating something. Where do you sit on that?
Yeah, I'd agree with that definitely. I think there is certainly a fine balance. I know that we've sort of almost now used books in order to make this podcast, which is a way that we're, you know, not just reading, but we're trying to do something different with it as well. So I 100% agree that you can get to the point where you're just reading so much that you're never actually taking a step back, analyzing it, thinking, how can I take this lesson and apply it to my life, business, relationships, career? That's our whiskey. That's our
what is it? It's a nitrogenated coffee tap that is doing something in the background there, but never mind. It makes it sound more authentic.
Yeah,
so
that's it.
It's great.
Push through it. But I think there is definitely a fine line between wanting to read and learn everything, and there's so many books out there and so many different ideas that we don't know yet that we should go and read more and learn more.
Yep.
But you do have to balance that with some real world action and putting into practice the things that you're learning as well.
Still need to function in society.
Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely.
Some books just like give you a good feeling reading it and aren't really applicable. And I'll use like one as an example. It's Good to Great by Jim Collins.
Yep.
Might be very applicable for you who's running a business right now. But there's a lot of people out there who, you know, are employees, and it really has no relevance. But at the same for a lot of employees, if you really think about it. But a lot of people who are in that employee situation rate that as their number one book. And, you know, and the same for us, that we love that book. But if you really think about it, there's nothing in it is really completely applicable for us right now. And some books every now and then, so I'd say most books have some kind of immediate input, but a lot of the time you're just reading for enjoyment.
Another
and you're
one-
fooling yourself that it's applicable.
Yeah. Another one for me early on, that idea of escapism, that idea of almost a fantasy world was like investing books. Like when I first started reading, I was in uni, I was working in a pub, I was making $400 a week or something. And I read all these investing books about how to play the stock market and how, you know, compound interest and different strategies for maximizing your return. And in the end, it was more just for my enjoyment and my self-opinion of, I'm this really smart dude. I can, you know, take advantage of the market to make so much money. But really it's like, I'm making $400 a week. I'm not investing in the stock market to make millions of dollars. Like, so that was probably more of the escapism side of things.
But then one day, you know, I'm of the opinion that most books will come in handy at some stage.
Yeah.
And if you got your notes there, and for us, if we've got a podcast episode just sitting there, you can always backtrack and it'll be somewhere embedded in your brain and you can just go back over it.
If you think it costs $30 and 10 hours of time, if you get one lesson out of there, well and truly worth it.
And the alternative being, if you got watching TV, Vikings is okay.
Survivor's my one.
Or reading, then, you know, it's pretty easy.
But it's also, you know, the alternative could also be, rather than $30 and 10 hours, it takes you $20,000 and 1,000 hours trying to work something out that you could have worked out for $30 and 10 hours. And that's really what people are missing out on when they don't read books that can benefit them. So just a couple of last things before we wrap up, guys. You know, podcasting for me has been super beneficial on a number of levels. I mean, when I first started out, it was more of a marketing channel, but it's gone way beyond that for me personally, like developing relationships with awesome people like yourselves, developing conversational skills, becoming a better listener. It's also created a lot of new opportunities that, you know, like I said, you got to go on the journey for the path to present itself. And, you know, getting Adam Grant to endorse my book on the front cover, up in lights, things like that never crossed my mind when I was starting the podcast. But it has just been like, it's not something that I can see myself stopping anytime soon, just because it is so beneficial. So, I mean, what have the benefits been for yourselves in hosting What You Will Learn?
For me, it's as you're saying, there's so many, there's such a big upside with minimal downside. It costs hardly anything to get started. Even if no one listens, you're stroking someone's... Doesn't hear it.
Hey, what are we
stroking someone's ego and self-opinion by asking them to come on the podcast. So a lot of guests, when you're getting started, aren't necessarily going to ask you, oh, what's your audience, and the questions they should be asking. A lot of the time, they're just going to say yes. So it can be a Trojan horse of meeting the people you want to meet. Yep. You know, I'll do another podcast which is more directly related to my day job. And in the space of 6 months, through a podcast, I got to meet the top 10 architects in the world on one specific topic.
What podcast is that?
It's called Wood Solutions Timber Talks.
Awesome.
So it's in that niche that no one else is in, and all of a sudden you get to speak to everyone in the world who are the top of this niche, and it's something that I think everybody can do for a very, very minimal cost. And even if you suck at it, it really doesn't matter if no one's listening at the start.
Yeah. I think again for us at the very start, we had all these different ideas of what a podcast could do for us, completely regardless of any potential audience. It was just obviously reading more and retaining more on the book side of things, but then also improving our conversation, improving our public speaking, improving our confidence, learning the skill of podcasting. But then it is like, I think it is pretty much the ultimate networking tool. It's sort of this excuse, like if we just said to Seth Godin, hey, Seth, we're two dudes from Australia, can we call you up and talk to you for half an hour? You'd probably say, no. I definitely
Probably wouldn't even respond to the email.
Exactly. But then when you think, can we call you up and talk to you for half an hour? We're going to put it on our podcast. It's almost just such a small hack that I think it's a great networking tool. Yeah. Obviously, when you first start, you're not going to get the massive sorts of guests that you've got, but you start small and build it. Actually, you started pretty strong. I think you had David Burke pretty early on.
Yeah, I had him episode 3 and Steve Blank episode 6.
Okay, well, maybe you can start strong.
We started small. You can always just leverage the names you've got at the start to get bigger and bigger. So, yeah, podcasts are huge.
100%. I'm still jealous about Seth Godin, and I reached out to him probably about a month ago, and he responded saying, sorry man, I'm all podcasted out for the moment.
I think you missed him by a month or two. We actually just missed the second wave as well. We'll try again in a couple of months.
That's all right. I'll get him next year, or this year. So podcast creations. What can you tell me about that? Because we've been talking about podcasting. What does Podcast Creations do? Tell us about it.
Yeah. So again, from this podcasting, I love the idea of podcasting. And then I went to, I started a whole bunch of other small podcasts that are not worth mentioning, but like wanted to self-publish a book. So I did interviewed 30 self-published authors. And then with this podcast, I interviewed a whole bunch of cool podcasters, made the podcast about podcasts.
Yep.
I just got hooked on this idea that podcasts are so awesome. And I wanted to sort of help people make their own. So I made an online course, which actually reminded me I need to update that because it's about a year and a half old now. But an online course. And then I had a few clients where I made a podcast for them where it was mainly focused on that idea of marketing. So for them specifically, they had a specific purpose of why they wanted to do a podcast to build their name. So it was sort of just helping other people make podcasts.
Fantastic. And that's still going?
Yeah,
cool.
Definitely.
Where can people find out more about that?
I'd say just get in touch with me directly, and I can. I love helping people out. Like to say, just recently we had a 20-year-old dude from the Netherlands emailed us and said, "Hey, I'm starting a podcast. I'm interviewing people, but I want to do book reviews, say once a month, and I haven't worked out how can I do a proper book review podcast that teaches people enough." That isn't too long-winded, and so I just jumped on a call with him and spoke to him for 20 minutes. So it's sort of just if people want to start a podcast, I'm more than happy to chat.
Fantastic. Well, we'll add your contact details in the show notes for our listeners. But before we wrap up, it's time for our 3-question lightning round. Hopefully you've listened to the end of my podcasts and you'll know what to expect. Hopefully you haven't. That way it's more fun. But, question number 1. If you could work for any company at any stage of the company life cycle, who would it be and at what stage?
I want to do the company I'm working for at the moment, I'll use that as a bit of a cop-out, but it's a company called Electric Global. It's a small Israeli startup, and I'm doing the marketing for them. And for me, it's maybe not that specific company, but just that idea of being at a company that's got a big idea with big potential to solve a big problem in the world, and I can contribute in a meaningful way. So it's not like I was previously working in a big corporate. There's no real nexus between effort and reward. You do work, you never really see the results of it. Whereas something small that you feel like there's a big purpose there, and you can see that if I do A, then B happens. There's that clear result of your effort leads to some kind of reward. So that's sort of a bit of a cop-out to say that something small, early stage, big purpose that you can clearly see results from your effort.
Totally get it, yeah.
For me, Steve, there's in construction right now. There's the first tech startup really jumping into construction right now, and they're from the USA and they're called Katera. And if you look at construction over the last 50 years and compare it to other industries like agriculture and electronics and so forth, which have all followed, some kind of Moore's law kind of curve, more or less, construction's really been stagnant. It's kind of just sat there and hasn't really done anything. And there is a graph that really shows this, and the productivity per worker has been really the same. And in construction, every single building out there, we design every single building once, which is ridiculous. If you compare that to how we make cars, we design it once and then pump out millions of them. Every single building out there is designed specifically once. So this is the first company in the world to really integrate the whole process of construction. So they've got the engineering, the architecture, the supply, the builder and so forth under the one banner. And they are leveraging their past designs and then using it as a Lego brick approach. So connecting the different Lego bricks into one building as opposed to designing every single element over and over again. So I think construction's really, really ripe for disruption, not only in productivity, but also in terms of sustainability. So right now, the cements in concrete is 8% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, which is more than cars on the roads, which no one really knows that. It's unbelievable. And same with steel. Steel's 3 or 4% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. So these are our most popular construction materials. And Katera, so they're upping their automation and productivity, but also using sustainable materials like sustainably sourced timber and doing it all prefabricated in factories. So watch out for construction. There's going to be some big changes there.
Very glowing review. I don't know if I should send this episode to the hiring manager at Katera.
I think we gave you a long answer to a short question.
Yeah.
All good. We've got time. Question number 2. If you could ask anyone a question dead or alive, who would it be and what would you ask?
You want to take this one first, mate?
Keep it to 30 seconds.
For me, I'll go, I love Thomas Edison. And I'd ask him, how did he have keep going in his vision, going for the light bulb after failing that 999th time before he got to that 1000th? How the hell can you fail that much and keep going?
Yeah, where does that faith come from?
Yeah.
Blind faith.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, fantastic. Much better length answer.
Let's see. I think I'd probably go back to. Sorry, I'm really dropping the ball on this one. Actually, I think I'm going to go Elon Musk.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, man, where do these ideas come from? Obviously, he's got a hell of a lot of ideas. He's doing, space, energy,
Neural net.
He's doing all the digging big holes, all these sorts of crazy things. So it's like, where are these ideas coming from? Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm sure it's a lot of pattern recognition and having collected a lot of dots and he's connecting them in his deep REM sleep. There you go. Bringing it all together at the end here. And lucky last, rituals and routines. We've touched on a couple of them today, but do you have any daily, I imagine you do have many daily rituals and routines. What are they? What do they look like?
For me, it's wake up at 5 a.m. I go to F45, so 45-minute pretty hardcore workout till about 6. Then I'll go for a swim. Normally a skinny dip if no one's in a 50-metre radius at the beach.
Nice.
And then followed by meditation when I get back, 15 minutes, read and coffee in the morning and then off to work. So,
Beautiful.
All that done before
Sounds like a miracle morning.
Yeah, I love it.
Yep.
Yeah, I wish I could say this was an everyday thing. It's probably a 2 or 3 times a week thing. Maybe I'll bump that up for 2019, but it's a morning swim, normally a kilometre in the pool, and then get the train to work, reading on the train. I normally get probably 2 trains earlier than I need to, which gives me about half an hour in the cafe reading a book with a coffee before
Beautiful.
work.
1 kilometre, is that undisturbed? Like non-stop?
No, doing laps. Yeah.
Yeah.
I normally do like to do a few sprints in there, so I'll probably do a 200-metre warm-up and then do like 450-metre sprints and then do 8 25-metre sprints. And
Fantastic. I suck in the pool. I think it's more a matter of technique than fitness. I'll do like 100 meters, and then I'll just be sitting at the end of the pool, huffing and puffing. I think,
I won 9 national gold medals for swimming when I was a kid.
Well, so I shouldn't feel too bad then.
Then I stopped swimming for about 8 years, so I'm trying to get back into it.
Yeah. So just quickly on that, why did you stop if you were so successful?
I think I got to it was when I was when I was a kid. I was 14.
Okay, yeah.
And then I just didn't really have the
drive.
I went to change school. I was getting up in school. I wanted to focus on studies, and I wasn't keen to swim that much.
Yeah. Fair enough. My own story there is I was a under 14 MVP playing basketball.
Ooh, nice.
But I stopped because everyone else kept growing. It is what it is. And I also discovered heavy metal music, grew my hair long, and started playing in a band. So I went on a totally different trajectory. But guys, people can find out more about your website over at whatyoullearn.com, and obviously they can find What You Will Learn on Apple Podcasts, everywhere podcasts can be found. Anything else you wanted to share?
I think one specific thing that we did 12 months ago, our top 50 best books of all time. And so if you head to whatyoullearn.com/top50, TOP50, we can send you that. We're actually in the midst right now in the next couple of weeks of updating that for the 2019 edition. There's going to be at least 20 new books in there. So if you want to check out the old edition and then be the first to find out about our new top 50 best books of all time, that's the place to go.
Fantastic. Well, we'll add that to the show notes for our listeners. Adam Jones, Adam Ashton, it has been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks so much, Steve. Loved it.
And I look forward to you telling me that you are drinking alcohol again. Hi guys, Steve again. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to receive a weekly email from me, complete with reflections, books I've been reading, words of wisdom, and access to blogs, ebooks, and more that I'm publishing on a regular basis, just leave your details at futuresquared.xyz/subscribe and you'll receive the very next one. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, take a minute to like, share, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. It goes a long way to giving the podcast the exposure it needs so I can continue bringing you guests and conversations of the highest caliber. You can catch me on Twitter at Steve Gliveski and on Instagram at TheSteveGliveski. Until next time.
Hasta la vista, baby.